I want to get to NC State Clemson. This is the Saturday night 7:30 Eastern time game on ABC. As of live broadcast tonight, they're still going to play this thing at 7:30 Saturday night. This was a runner-up. Let me stress that, a runner-up for our Every Given Saturday tour destination this week. I pay attention to weather every bit as much as I pay attention to college football, so I was well aware the conditions could rapidly deteriorate there Saturday, and it looks like they will. That's not the only reason we're not there, but it was chief among them. How big is this game, though? Forget about whether we're there or not. How big is this game? Massive, huge, because the wonky shape of the ACC right now is such that 3 or 4 or maybe 5 of the best teams in the conference are all in one division. These are 2 of them. This may be the 2 best teams in the conference. Clemson and NC State. If Clemson loses this game, you're essentially a game and a half behind. You need the Wolfpack to drop 2 conference games, and it's possible, it's just not likely. You can repeat the same sentence on the other side of the fence there. It's the first meeting with both these teams in the top 10. It's the first, or it's, Jesse told me it's one of only 3 games in the country featuring 4-0 FBS teams this weekend, which is an interesting note to me. Also, here's what the weather has done in real terms to this game. The total opened at 48. That thing has been hammered all the way down to 40. Now, I'm just going to tell you this. If wind is a factor here, that's appropriate. If it's not, that total's about 10 or 11 points too low, so keep an eye on those wind conditions, kids. What have you been versus what can you be? Remember last week, that was kind of a theme on the show. What have you been? And then, have you been everything you could be? And if you haven't, do you have it in you to spring an upset and surprise the college football world? Well, NC State, on average, they have faced the 109th best pass defense in the country, which would lead you to believe, if you haven't watched the games, Devin Leary has feasted on that inferior defensive back competition, right? Wrong. He hasn't, which is troubling going into this game, because even though Clemson gave up some big yardage totals last week to Wake, if you got to throw into the wind and you're not doing good throwing in sterile conditions against the average 109th ranked pass defense to begin with, are you going to do something for me this week that you haven't been able to do yet? That's this classic kind of game here. If NC State pulls the upset, it's because Leary does something he was always capable of. We've seen him do it before. We just hadn't seen it this year. And it's not just on him. It's a collective, but he's the guy pulling the trigger back there. Number 1, is he capable of more? Number 2, is Saturday the day that we see that? And when you go back to last week and you look on the other side of the field here and you talk about DJ Uiagalelei having those big numbers he put up against Wake, is it transferable? My initial thought was good for him. He got a really, really good statistical game under his belt. That gets him ready for NC State. But the more I went back and watched it, the more I saw receivers making real good plays for him. That's part of it. But I did not take away from that game that a lot of what I saw last Saturday was transferable. It just seamlessly carries over, if you know what I mean. So he may still have a dynamite game this Saturday. I don't think it's as simple as, well, he did it against Wake, so let's just keep that momentum going. I think a lot of things that worked against Wake last week probably grind to a halt this week. Doesn't mean he can't have production. I just think you're starting from scratch again. To what degree does weather impact the offensive rhythm here? Which is the million-dollar question that we can't really answer yet. It looks like it's going to impact things pretty significantly. Wind, though, forget about the rain. Wind is what slows this to a crawl. If you got 15 or 20 mile an hour plus winds, that's what really slows this to a crawl. And I think about Brandon Streeter, who's the offensive coordinator for Clemson, and I wonder, is he willing to be patient? This could very well turn into the kind of game where you've got like an 80 to 20 run to pass ratio. The problem is, boy, that Wake Forest game is so fresh in your mind. And boy, DJ Uiagalelei putting up all those passing yards, it's so fresh in your mind. And you know what it gets sometimes? Running the ball over and over again, it gets kind of boring. And you know what you got on that play sheet in front of you? You got a lot of stuff you've worked on in spring. You got a lot of stuff you worked on in fall camp. You got stuff you've installed for your game plan this week. And it just starts yelling at you. And eventually, you start calling some of those plays just because you have a tendency to not want to keep them in your back pocket. You don't want to leave bullets in the chamber. You want to use everything you prepared for. And sometimes, the best chance that you give yourself to win is just doing the same 3 or 4 things over and over and over again. And it may be that it's death by 1,000 paper cuts to the opposition, but eventually it works. Is that the kind of game we have Saturday? And if it is, I'm thinking about both sides here, frankly, and I'm thinking about how critical defensive scoring will be in this game. That's the way that these weather games always play out. When you have a lot of wind and rain, it's the defensive scores that a lot of times determine the game. And it applies both ways because Leary's going to have to throw as well. I mean, they're not going to run the ball to win against Clemson. They're going to have to throw. Now, Hartman was able to do it against them last week. That's a different world than what they're going to play in Saturday. But what interests me is we pull up the model here. I'll go ahead and show you what the computer thinks about it. As we pull up the model, I will tell you the Vegas number here is 6.5. I think that's what we still have. Yeah, Clemson minus 6.5. Home field's baked in there. So odds makers are essentially telling you about a field goal or so separates these teams on a neutral field, which is not too far off from, frankly, what I expected in the preseason. The model is a little bit shorter. The model has Clemson minus 5. And I watched that Wake game last week, and I knew where I was going on this thing as soon as that game wrapped up. I think there's a little bit of false sense of confidence that was given to Clemson last week. Forget about Clemson, in people's minds about Clemson because of that outcome. Had they dropped that game in overtime, this line would be 4-3, somewhere around there. And really, there's no difference in the outcomes. If anything, Clemson would be more desperate this week. I think NC State's got it in them to win this game, and I think they're going to win it. I think they're going to pull the upset, so I'm going to take NC State plus 6.5. I'm going to take them outright. Super Bowl mode. I simply think you're going to get a performance collectively out of them that's better than anything you've seen this year because I think it's in them. In other words, I do not think that the sum so far of what they've put out there is what their maximum capability is. And I think you're going to get it Saturday. Now, what could happen is you could have just a horrifically ugly game to where you watch it and whoever wins, wins. Maybe it's NC State, maybe it's Clemson, but regardless of who wins, you could walk away from that game saying, I don't even know what to make of this because, yeah, they played it and both teams had to play in the same conditions, but this was not conducive to a meaningful result for me. That Notre Dame-NC State game once upon a time where they played in a tropical storm, I felt that way coming out of that one. I think Deshaun Kaiser started for Notre Dame at quarterback, and Brian Kelly just said, hey, screw it. We're going to throw into that wind anyway. And the ball did exactly what it does in about 40, 45-mile-an-hour winds, and Notre Dame dropped that game because NC State was disciplined enough to wait for them to give them the game. I wonder if that's how it turns out Saturday. We'll see. First sip from the chalice here. Colin, you were right. It tastes so much better. Guys, thanks for watching Late Kick. Make sure and leave a comment. I love interacting with you. But most of all, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep all of this free.